Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be, finally, my review of The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. First of all, let us talk about the elephant in the room, or the dragon in the room, as it is, I guess, because let's take a look at this cover. Isn't it beautiful? It's absolutely glorious. We're in love with it. It's okay. The whole thing. It's just beautiful. So, everybody at this point has been raving about The Shadow of the Gods. You're not going to hear anything different from me because I loved this book so incredibly much. I have gotten through the first two books in The Faithful and the Fallen. I have gotten through Malice and I've gotten through Valor, and while I really enjoyed them and I really enjoyed the characters, I don't think that I love them quite to the level that a lot of people have, and maybe that'll change when I get to Ruin and Wrath. I've heard that it does, and I'm still really excited to finish that series. But The Shadow of the Gods, which is what this review is actually about, blew me away. A lot of my issue with the Faithful and the Fallen series is the massive cast of characters. I think you follow something like 7 or 8 POVs, maybe more than that in the second book. I'm not 100% sure on the exact number. And for me, with all that's going on and how many different times you jump between them as they're technically just going through different things in life, it was really hard for me to get attached to some of the characters, so I inevitably really enjoyed some POVs while I didn't really care at all about others. And because of that, when I got to the chapters of people that I didn't like as much, I kind of just, I didn't skim, but I was less invested, and it took me a lot longer to read them because if I stopped in the middle of one of those chapters, I knew that I was going to have a harder time picking it up. The Shadow of the Gods does not have that issue at all. You follow 3 characters, Orca, Varg, and Elvar. Orca is a badass mom who ends up having to set out from her homestead on a mission of rescue and revenge, and Varg is a former thrall, which is kind of like a slave, who is just trying to fulfill an oath to his sister, and he ends up joining a warband called the Bloodsworn, who are amazing. And then finally you follow Elvar, who is a younger girl who, I think she's actually in her 20s, and she is just trying to make a name for herself and have some battle glory and get lots of spoils of war and just kill some things, essentially. So this is a Norse-inspired fantasy, epic fantasy. You've heard plenty of people talking about it before at this point. I know that everybody on BookTube and on Goodreads and Book Twitter and all of that stuff is raving about this book. It deserves it. While I was invested in the Faithful and the Fallen characters, this really got me invested in these characters in particular. Orca and Varg were definitely my 2 favorites. Elvar definitely picked up towards the middle end of the book, where in the beginning I kind of cared about her storyline a little bit less until certain things were revealed. It was so good. Essentially, which I have not actually talked about this yet, I guess. So essentially this book follows the 3 of them in a world where the old gods have died, in a very Ragnarok-like fashion, kind of fulfilling the rest of the Viking inspiration. They have died in a Ragnarok-type manner in which they have all kind of killed each other out, and humankind, such as it is left without any gods. However, there are people living in this world that are descendants of the gods. They kind of have animal characteristics. There are people that are kind of like half hound. They've got acute senses of smell and hearing. You've got like descendants of the rat god. I think there's a descendant of a badger god, a wolf, a bear, and maybe ogres. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but there's pretty much, I think, anything you can realistically think of, there are probably descendants of them. And it was so cool. Oh, and dragons, obviously. There's dragon-born people also. It's pretty cool, honestly. The magic system mostly revolves around that as far as I can tell. There's like magical creatures, and then there's also like kind of witches and sorcerers that can perform magical spells. I believe they are descendants of the gods as well, of a specific god. So the magic system was pretty cool. The mythology of this was pretty cool, and once again John Gwynne really came through with his character work, because I would literally go to the ends of the earth for Orca, and Varg was insanely relatable in his battle situations where he just kept forgetting really important things, like his helmet, or like to take the covering off of his spear as somebody's like bearing down on him to murder him. It was pretty relatable, honestly. I probably would have forgotten really more important things in his situation, but yeah, it was pretty funny, and it was so good. Honestly, I think that this book is extremely relatable for anybody who has read high fantasy and enjoys high fantasy. Even if you're relatively new to the genre, I think that you would have an easy time following this. I read the arc of it, so I haven't read the physical copy yet, but I do think... Is there a glossary? I don't think there's a glossary. There's not a glossary, but it would definitely benefit the book if it had included one. I think that John Gwynne said in an interview that they wanted one, and they're hoping to put one in future books, but it just didn't make it into the first ones. And there were just moments where he would use words that pertain to the story, or pertain to like a piece of armor that they would wear or something like that, where you definitely needed the context clues to figure out what exactly was being discussed. Wasn't hard to do, it just took a little bit extra effort. It's not a big deal, but that was probably one point that I would have to nitpick in here, was that a glossary would have been a little bit more helpful. I did have to check to see if the finished copy had it, because I ended up reading an arc of this and did not have any maps or glossaries. This does have a map, fortunately. John Gwynne also has a really realistic way of writing fight scenes and battle scenes, and me, as somebody that has obviously never experienced anything of the sort, has had a really easy time following along with all of the battles that were going on, and it was just a really immersive way of writing these scenes that gets you sucked into everything that is happening. I can't talk enough about how much I've enjoyed John Gwynne's writing style. It's just so accessible. His world building is so accessible. It's, like I said, it's very simple to follow for somebody that's relatively new to the genre. If you are just looking into John Gwynne as an author, I think that any of his books would be a good one for you to pick up, just because it's not super complicated, it's not overly unfamiliar world building wise, because he does tend to follow like true historical cultures. So this one is Viking inspired. Faithful and the Fallen does seem to be a little bit more like Celtic inspired, and it's just really interesting because you almost feel as though you're reading actual history, but just with a little bit of magic thrown in there, and it almost feels like you're reading like an alternate history. So the Viking inspiration was cool. I know that he does actually have a lot of experience as a Viking reenactor, which makes a lot of this even cooler. A lot of it seems to be a lot more historically accurate just because of that. I know that he just recently did an interview with Daniel Green where he discusses that, and it was really cool to listen to his process and what he does when he talks about all of his Viking reenactments and stuff. So that was highly entertaining. Now, this is the first book in a brand new series, so we're going to have a long time to wait. I think he did just finish writing the first draft of the second book, but we're probably going to have to wait a year because this did just come out the 4th, I believe, in the United States, and on the 6th in the UK. So we're gonna have a while to wait for book 2, and this left me with a pretty big book hangover at the very end of it. There were plot twists throughout the entire thing that just kind of kept you guessing about what was going to happen next and who everybody was. It was surprising to me, at least. It might not have been as surprising to somebody else, but I was surprised. I was surprised at the end, and I really want to see what happens in book 2. Now, if you're curious, if you need to read The Faithful and the Fallen before this, it is an entirely different world. It is an entirely different series. There's really no connection between the two, so if you want to pick up The Shadow of the Gods as your first John Gwynne book, it's entirely possible for you to do so. His writing, I honestly think, in The Shadow of the Gods is better than it was in Malice, and I've already touched on it a little bit, but I did like this book more than I liked Malice so far. It was just a little bit easier for me to follow the characters and the world and all of that stuff, and I really, really enjoyed that. So I did end up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. I haven't really made any secret of the fact throughout this entire video how much I have loved this book. I really hope that you guys will take a chance and pick it up if you haven't read any of John Gwynne's writing before, and I think that is it for me today, guys, so I will talk to you in my next video. Bye!
you.